This is a CBC podcast.
How are you feeling about sending the kids back to school? This is Alberta at Noon. I'm Judy Aldis. 2 weeks ago, Education Minister Adriana LaGrange announced back-to-school plans.
Parents, students, and school staff can look forward to a normal school year this September.
Well, a lot has changed since then as COVID numbers rise. The biggest school boards in the province have said masks will be required. Online learning options were made available. Not exactly a normal school year. So as kids head back under a bit of a cloud of uncertainty again, we want to know what your questions are, how you're feeling about the upcoming school year. About 7 minutes after 12. Welcome to the show. Hope you had a nice weekend. Well, a few things will be the same as last year. Masks will be mandatory at Calgary and Edmonton public and Catholic schools, even though the province is not mandating them. Other things will be different than last year. If a student or a staff member tests positive for COVID, they don't have to tell the school. They will be expected to isolate, but contacts won't be notified. Schools are supposed to keep track of how many people call in sick, and then if a bunch of them mention similar symptoms and those numbers get big enough, AHS will be notified. Sports, extracurriculars back on. So with the school year about to start, how are you feeling about the coming semester? Maybe you have a child or children heading back to class. Maybe you work in a school. Either way, we would love to hear from you. 1-866-468-4422. The chairs of the public school boards in Edmonton and Calgary are my guests today. So the number for you to call, 1-866-468-4422. Emails go to alberta@noon@cbc.ca. On Twitter, we are at Alberta at Noon. And again, our guest today, Marilyn Dennis. She is the chair of the Calgary Board of Education. Tricia Estabrooks is chair of Edmonton Public Schools. We have connected with them via Zoom. They're here for the hour. Hello to both of you.
Hello, Judy.
Nice to have you back.
Hello.
Tricia Estabrooks, in this year's back-to-school plan announced by the province, it says that Alberta is moving into a recovery phase with COVID-19 and that the back-to-school plan will sort of help that transition to recovery. I'm wondering what you think. As the school year starts, does it feel to you like we are headed to a sort of towards recovery when it comes to COVID?
You know, you use the word normal in your introduction, Judy, and I would just blatantly say that this is not a normal school year. You know, this is our second year returning, kids returning to classrooms during a pandemic. So things are very much similar to how they were last year. You know, some of the same protocols that our families here in Edmonton would be used to, you'll see them again. And the reason why they're still in place is we know that they worked. You know, families, not just in Edmonton, but across this province are watching COVID case numbers very, very closely. And I certainly think, you know, seeing new cases in the 1,000+ range every day consistently for the last few days, that has certainly activated my inbox, Judy, I would say. Lots of families in this city really grateful that Edmonton Public is taking the step and other metro jurisdictions doing the same, keeping the same protocols in place. So, yeah, to sum up, it's not a normal school year, but you know what? Staff in our schools will do what they do best, which is welcome students back to a safe learning environment again this school year. So looking forward, as a parent myself, looking forward to having my own kids go back to school later this week.
Okay, so for those in that inbox you mentioned that you're getting so many emails from parents, what would be the top 3 concerns that you're hearing?
Top 3 concerns, certainly prior to Edmonton Public making the decision around mandatory masks, was please, please, please put mandatory masks in place. The other big request was to continue with cohorts and physical distancing. The other big request I've been hearing about, and you alluded to it already, was contact tracing. You know, that unfortunately is outside of our jurisdiction as schools, but certainly when we hear of a positive case in our schools, staff will notify families who are affected. So that being said, you know, there are some families, Judy, that are concerned about our mandatory masks being put in place here at Edmonton Public. So have received numerous emails about that as well.
So just go back to the tracing for a second. You said so that if your staff hears about a positive case, what will happen?
So we really rely upon our parents and our families to inform us if someone in their household or their child who attends one of our Edmonton public schools, if they test positive, we're encouraging them to call the school and let us know. And if that happens, then school administration will reach out and share that with the close contacts in that classroom. So,
and then what will happen? Will students?
A letter will be sent home telling parents that there's a positive case. But we are not health authorities, as we've said numerous times. And so we don't have the jurisdiction to quarantine a whole class or send entire cohorts of classes home, which was all that sort of what I affectionately have called the COVID coaster and that disruption to learning. That's just not going to happen this year because we don't have the jurisdiction to send those kids home for an extended period of time.
All right. Marilyn Dennis, for the Calgary Board of Education, masks mandatory, but will the same system apply around notification of cases, positive cases, as what Tricia is describing in Edmonton?
Yes, so masks are mandatory, and I think what we've been communicating really clearly to our public is that we will be reevaluating the protocols that we have in place by the end of September. So some things may change, but certainly for the beginning of the school year, masks will be mandatory for our kindergarten through grade 12 students and staff members. In terms of contact tracing and isolation requirements, all of those things were directed by AHS. The CBE did not direct those activities. Those were directed by AHS. We certainly hope that families will inform us if there is a positive case of COVID in their home. They are not obligated to do that, and AHS won't be doing that any longer. So certainly we will keep track as best we can, and we'll be working with our local medical officer of health in terms of direction around what to do next. And like with any, not just with COVID, but what might be helpful for your listeners to also know is that, whenever absenteeism rates in schools hit approximately that 10% mark, and it could be from anything, it could be from, COVID-like symptoms or flu-like symptoms or some, gastrointestinal illness or what have you, is that once that happens and we see about a 10% absenteeism rate and, symptoms that are very common, then AHS does take a look at what's going on and provides direction. So that's not just related to COVID, but really any sort of illness. So when you talk about normal, I think, just going back to that, I think, is the school year normal compared to 2 years normal? No, I would say not exactly normal. But I do hope that we'll see some normalcy coming back in terms of that we're just not talking about COVID all the time. Yeah. That there are other things that are happening too.
But just really, if I can just get an answer, Tricia Estabrooks was describing how if a parent were to call an Edmonton public school and say my kid or someone tested positive, that school would then notify the classroom. But that is not going to happen within Calgary schools. Is that what you're telling me?
We would do that in consultation with our local medical officer of health.
Okay. All right. My guest today on the program, Marilyn Dennis, the chair of the Calgary Board of Education, Tricia Estabrooks, chair of Edmonton Public Schools. They're spending the hour with us today answering all the questions that you might have about back to school. Of course, they are, they help run the two biggest school boards in the province. So there's a great opportunity for you to just tell us how you're feeling about going back to school, whether you are the parent of a child or children at school or whether you're someone who works within the school. You can let us know, your thoughts about the upcoming school year and ask questions as well. Here's the phone number, 1-866-468-4422. 1-866-468-4422. Lots of calls coming in. We'll get to you in just a minute. We haven't heard from the education minister publicly since August the 13th. That clip we played off the top of the show, that was from that today. Do you feel like you have the direction you need to start another school year? Tricia, do you want to start us off with your answer to that?
Well, the last time we heard from our education minister was when she made the announcement with Dr. Hinshaw that schools have the autonomy to make the decisions that are best for the families and the students that they serve. And so, although we don't see, a provincial mandate like we did last year, I think it is appreciated, though, that we do know our communities best. And so we have been given the green light that we can go ahead and make the decisions, working with health officials that we think are best for our communities. And so, you now see the 4 largest school divisions, Edmonton Catholic's news earlier today, mandating masks. Shortly after the school divisions mandated masks, you saw our universities doing the same. And so, this is the great thing about serving as an elected trustee. Like, we represent the voices of parents. And I can tell you unequivocally, the majority of parents in this city in Edmonton, they want to continue to see protocols in place. And so happy that we can bring that voice forward as elected representatives.
And so, Marilyn Dennis, let me ask you, do you feel like you have the direction that you need from the province to start the school year as you want to start it?
Yeah, I think if you recall, in mid-August, it was, I believe, August 13th, Dr. Hinshaw penned a letter to parents and guardians of Alberta students. And in that letter, she actually states that use of face masks in indoor settings is one intervention that can decrease the risk of transmission of all respiratory illnesses. And then also in that same letter, she goes on to say that local policy on measures in schools needs to be informed by local perspectives and context. So school boards have the ability to implement additional measures where they deem it appropriate. And so when you are looking, I guess, the difference between, the start of last school year where, there were mask mandates in place implemented by the province, across the province. Here, we do have that ability to look at our own individual context and say, this is what we need to do to, ensure a safe environment for all of our staff and students to come back to. There are communities in the city communities in the province that haven't seen cases of COVID. So their response to this is going to be different. But, certainly in the metro context, we felt that we needed to go this direction.
Someone has tweeted in to say, feeling thankful that my children are well past school aged and that I had enough foresight to leave the school district and find another job years ago. My heart goes out to all the staff, students, and parents. This listener's sense is that the province has abdicated its responsibility. Lots of people messaging in about mask use. So why don't we stay with that? We'll have Mike. Mike's in Calgary. He's on the phone with us. Mike, hello.
Hello, just one.
Are you good there, Mike?
I'm good. I just had to take it off speaker.
Okay, yeah.
I just frustrated with the mask thing. It's so one-sided that it's like masks, no mental health issues. Like I'm going at this from the perspective of my son who's going to grade 5. He was so frustrated with wearing masks last year. Like he was crying all the time. And it's just like no mental health issue, like no mental health or any other thing. It's just masks will save everything. And so just want to say I'm not very good at expressing it, but I'm just frustrated with the mask being one-sided. This whole COVID thing being one-sided, like you can't die of COVID, but it's okay if you die of a heart attack because we've, canceled every other surgery. Just that kind of frustration.
Right, yeah. Although it was all mostly elective surgeries, right? They got canceled. But Mike, so what? Your child, I guess, is going to grade 5, can't be vaccinated. Does that add to your concerns at all?
No, because our family actually got COVID in February, and he had to be tested because my wife and I had COVID and had symptoms. He got tested because that was what had to be done, and then he found out he had COVID, but he had 0 symptoms whatsoever.
Right, yeah, which is often the case,
and that's the children are strong and resilient, and it helps build up your body. Just like I kind of feel like the medical community has abandoned the belief that natural, like getting the symptom or whatever and getting natural immunity is a good thing.
Well, I guess maybe because the medical community probably often is the ones treating the ones who don't, aren't lucky like your kid, perhaps, and they see sometimes the sick kids. But I hear you. So the frustration. So if I can just, I'm going to let you go here for a second, Mike. But just so I make sure your question is, you just wish the masks weren't mandated. Does your child go to a public school in Calgary?
Yeah. I wish it wasn't mandated because children have stronger bodies than we do, like for fighting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's silly.
Okay. All right. Mike, thanks for your phone call. Let me give out the phone number again, and then I'll just, the number is 1-866-468-4422. 1-866-468-4422. And in terms of medical related questions, I would, we won't put those to Tricia and Marilyn because they are here as the chair of school boards, not as sort of public health professionals. But we do have Dr. Jia Hu will join us after 12:30 to talk a little bit, answer some of the issues that Mike brought up. But Marilyn, since this was a parent in Calgary, I'll throw that to you. First of all, maybe just briefly outline for a listener like Mike, and we're getting a lot of people. Here's another message from someone who says, I'm not going to send my kids to school so long as there is a mask mandate. What the plan is long-term for masks, and then perhaps address the issue around mental health that Mike brought up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marilyn.
No, happy to do that, and just want to thank Mike for calling in and for sharing that with us today. I think masks are a challenging conversation, right? And we have, many families who are reaching out saying masks aren't enough, please do more, and other families reaching out saying, please don't mask. And so, this is one of the reasons why we are also reevaluating by the end of September. We will be in contact with our local medical officer of health and Dr. Hinshaw and Alberta Education throughout the month, and just keep track of how things are going. There will be, the ability to also be exempt from wearing masks. And so there was an exemption process last school year that continues to be in place. So the protocol does include an exemption process. So where someone is, an individual is physically, psychologically, or developmentally unable to wear a mask, they will not be required to wear a mask. And also, like last year in our schools, there will be times for, mask breaks and mask-free periods as well. So really trying to do our best to, sort of balance, the fact that we've also got approximately 70,000 young people under the age of 12 coming into our buildings next week who cannot yet be vaccinated. And so, trying to balance what we can around, what protocols do we think will be helpful, but then also making sure that the school year feels as normal as it possibly can be. And certainly, the learning and mental health of our students is of utmost priority and concern. And, we are weighing those issues as well as some of these protocols are put in place.
I want to talk about cohorts. We're getting a couple of people wondering about how cohorts will work, where they'll be in place, that sort of thing. Tricia Estabrooks from the Edmonton Public Schools, in what way will students be cohorted at Edmonton Public Schools?
Really similar to the way in which they were cohorted or put into groups last year. So at elementary, it's actually pretty easy to stay in your cohort. Like, elementary students have the one classroom teacher. They stay with the same group of children. They remain with that same group of children during recess and lunch. So very, very similar to last year. Cohorting in junior high and high school is a little more complex, especially as we get into some of those higher grades, kids wanting to pursue specialty courses or alternative courses. Options is what they're called. So, it's similar to, everything that Marilyn from CBE has been saying around, school divisions know how to pivot, right? We know how to evolve, go with the flow, if you will, in terms of navigating COVID. So Marilyn talked about masking. And, if we start to see those vaccination rates increase, here at Edmonton Public, we could see easing of mask requirements. Same goes for cohorts, for example, right? So if, we're seeing that good threshold of vaccination rates in close contact with health officials, that conversation happens, perhaps we ease up on the cohorting. So again, we've become very adept at being nimble and being flexible, but above all, and, I want to thank Mike for calling in too. I know masks aren't easy. I don't understand why they're so controversial. I've got to say, to me, it really is a shared responsibility, safety in schools. So I just wanted to put that out there. We know that masks work as well. But, we know that we're going to have to be flexible. We know we're going to have to likely change things as we go through this school year. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we can get our students under the age of 12 vaccinated as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Because, Mike said, masks won't save everything. No, they're one very good mitigation strategy. But what will help us is high vaccination rates. So in other words, is it the vaccination rates? That's what you'll tie your changes to masking around? That's part of it. Yeah. And certainly, again, we're not health officials. Conversations with Alberta Health Services, but certainly vaccination rates will be a considerable factor in deciding when to ease up on masking restrictions, for example.
Yeah, Marilyn.
Yeah, I would concur with what Tricia has said there from Edmonton Public, but it is also, yes, it's increased the vaccination rates. It is, what does the case count look like in our communities, in our local context, and also, the number of students that continue to be ineligible for vaccination. Like I said a few minutes ago, we have close to 70,000 little human beings coming into our schools next week who are ineligible for vaccination. So as those things start to adjust, then I can see some of our protocols also relaxing. And masks are only one part of it, right? I mean, we are, still encouraging good hand hygiene, good respiratory etiquette. We are doing cohorting from kindergarten to grade 6, so not from grade 7 to 12. We are continuing to have an enhanced cleaning protocols in our school, so all those high touch surfaces will be cleaned more often, and also increasing ventilation in our buildings too. So masking is only one piece of our protocols, so we have many pieces that we're looking to do to keep our students and staff safe.
Marilyn Dennis, Tricia Estabrooks, the chairs of the Calgary and Edmonton Public School Boards, our guests today on the program. An opportunity for you listeners to call in and tell us your thoughts about the upcoming school year. How are you feeling? The province has said it's going to be back to normal. Does that sort of resonate with you? What are your questions you might have? 1-866-468-4422. Here's a question for you, Marilyn Dennis. It's from Gino, who says he's a step-parent whose stepchild is going into grade 8. My question is, what are the reasons for not notifying classrooms of a positive test result from a classmate? How is this in line with a safe school environment? If the school boards have full autonomy, then why are they relying on the Chief Medical Officer of Health for whether to notify parents of positive results? Gino sent that in. Marilyn Dennis, how would you respond?
Thank you for the question. Those practices were actually completed by AHS. And so direction to isolate and direction to contact, those are directions that come from AHS. They never came from the CBE before. And so
I know, but we're hearing that Edmonton is going to be notifying, I guess he's wondering why Calgary wouldn't as well. Like, as he says, if you have full autonomy, why not do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I say, we're relying on our local Chief Medical Officer of Health for advice.
All right. Is that something that might be reconsidered along the way if parents, ask for it?
Yeah, and I would say, I think with our protocols the way they are, we have a commitment to review them before the end of September. And if something isn't working, then we will need to adjust.
All right. We're getting lots of your phone calls coming in, and, we appreciate it. We will get to all of them in the next half hour of the program. The number for you to call to get in the queue is 1-866-468-4422. Marilyn Dennis, Chair of the Calgary Board of Education, Tricia Estabrooks, Chair of Edmonton Public Schools, both running for re-election this fall. They'll stay with us until 1. I'm Judy Aldis. You're listening to Alberta at Noon, a Monday edition of the show. The open line program for the province. Glad to have you with us. After our news break, Dr. Jiahu will join us to answer all your medical related questions. Lots of them coming in about masks, of course, but other issues as well. So we're sort of collecting them all and we'll put them to Dr. Who. But it is now at 12:30. And so we will head to the newsroom. Tahara Fruzan with us from there. Hey.
Hi, Judy. Several announcements have come out this morning regarding masks in Edmonton. Starting tomorrow, all City of Edmonton employees employees working indoors at city-owned and operated facilities and workspaces will have to wear a mask. This includes city vehicles. As well, all city employees will have until September 10th to disclose whether they've been vaccinated. And the Edmonton Elks announced their new COVID-19 protocols for fans. Starting with the club's home game at Commonwealth Stadium on October 15th, fans will have to show proof that they are fully vaccinated or produce a negative COVID-19 test result. In Calgary, a group of candidates running for Calgary City Council wants to return to the mandatory mask mandate for indoor public spaces. They also want a proof of vaccination requirement in order for Calgarians to access services, take part in events, and attend workplaces. The group is proposing that the new rules take effect in mid-October, just days before the municipal election. And turning to weather in Calgary today, a few clouds, windy and a high of 25 degrees. Then tomorrow, some clouds, 60% chance of showers and a risk of a thunderstorm, high of 17. Wednesday, cloudy, 60% chance of showers as well and a high of 15. Edmonton, much of the same today. Some clouds, some wind, high of 24. Tomorrow, mainly cloudy, windy and a high of 17. And Wednesday, rain and a high of 13 degrees. Right now in Edmonton and in Calgary, both cities are sitting at 19 degrees.
Well, thank you for that, Tahara.
Thanks.
Tahara Fruzen in our newsroom. I'm Judy Aldis with most kids in kindergarten to grade 12 heading back to school this week. We are spending the hour getting answers to your questions about the year ahead. Here's how you reach us, 1-866-468-4422. Heard from a number of parents so far. I'd love to hear from people working in the schools as well. If you're a teacher working in the office of one of the schools, we'd love to hear from you, your thoughts, your questions about the upcoming school year. 1-866-468-4422. Alberta at noon at cbc.ca is where you send your emails. On Twitter, we are at Alberta at noon. And I should mention that we did invite Alberta's Minister of Education to speak with us today, but Adriana LaGrange was not available. But as I promised, right now we have Dr. Jia Hu on the line. He is a public health physician, one of the founders of 19 to 0, which is a coalition working to build confidence in vaccines. Dr. Hu has also been giving advice to school boards. If you have a child in the Calgary Catholic District, you would have received a link to a letter that he wrote in defense of masks, and he has been advising that school board how to approach COVID this year. Dr. Hu is on the phone with us now. Hello, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
Yeah. As I mentioned, you did write a letter to parents with kids in Calgary Catholic School District explaining why you think masks should be worn in schools this fall. As you've heard, we've heard from a number of parents who, don't want their children wearing masks. Some of them going so far as to say that, it's sort of torturous for the children. Make the case for us for why masks are necessary in schools.
Yeah, and I think I wrote this letter. I didn't realize it'd be so controversial. But I mean, I think what we know is that masks are an effective tool for preventing the transmission of COVID-19 in an array of settings, right? And that's why in the past we have had masking in schools, masking in indoor public places. That's why in various jurisdictions across the United States where they're seeing an uptick in Delta, these mask bylaws that were no longer in place are coming back. Certainly I would say right now in Alberta, in Calgary, we have a lot of cases. They seem to be going up. And I think that, the main goals really are to keep people, kids, staff safe, and also to try to keep the schools as open as much as possible, because I do think there's a lot of benefit in person learning, and masking is a good way to do that.
And it was left up to the school boards to do that. We've seen that, the four biggest school boards in Calgary and Edmonton, the public and Catholic school boards all mandate them, but elsewhere in the province, not. Would you think that that's sort of the right approach, or would you rather see a provincial mandate for masking in schools?
Well, it's interesting because I do think that, first of all, I don't make these decisions, but second of all, I do think that we should generally tailor our responses to the local epidemiology, right? And by that I mean, to me, it makes a lot more sense to have a masking mandate in a place with a lot of cases than a place with fewer cases. And I advise many school boards, not in Edmonton and Calgary, and some of them are not mandating masks, and there's situations where it may not make sense to mandate masks. I do sort of recognize that the lack of a provincial mandate can be confusing, but I think that having a tailored approach actually is pretty good, because we don't all see the same numbers of COVID based on where we are at any given time.
The letter that you sent to parents in the Calgary Catholic, was that because the board was getting pushback from parents about making kids wear masks?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I in my sort of prior role as a medical officer of health, I'd worked a lot with these school boards, and then Calgary Catholic gave me a call and said they wanted some help. And so, I mean, part of it was, they are getting pushback. Part of it is also, I think that, as you mentioned, I think a lot of the decision-making around COVID restrictions have sort of been left up to the school boards, and they wanted somebody with some public health expertise to help them out. And so, wrote a letter.
All right. We had I'm not sure if you heard Dr. Who earlier in the program, we had a listener named Mike who was sending his child back to school in Calgary, was upset about the mask mandate and just said, kids don't get sick when they get COVID, that we shouldn't sort of bubble wrap them. We shouldn't try and protect them necessarily from getting it because, his child got COVID, didn't get sick. When you hear that, how do you respond?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people get COVID and they don't get super sick. A lot of 80-year-olds get COVID and they're okay with it. But that doesn't mean all kids are fine. Maybe I shouldn't frame it that way. But, you're right. He's right. The vast majority of kids who get COVID will be okay. Frankly, the vast majority of 75-year-olds who get COVID are fine, but plenty of them actually have pretty bad outcomes. And, kids are not immune to some of the bad things that happen, whether it's long hauler syndrome or just straight up severe infection. There's lots of in the U.S. where there's a lot more COVID, thousands of kids have died of COVID. Lots of pediatric ICUs are filling up. And so I wouldn't say it's wonderful, but, a child had gone through COVID pretty well. But we know that not every child does. And so I think that obviously COVID can affect kids pretty badly. And that's why, a lot of parents want to vaccinate their kids. A lot of parents are scared about school reopening.
Does it matter to you that parents won't necessarily know if their child has been around someone at school who tested positive for COVID, right? The requirement to notify, let's say you or your kid gets a positive test, the requirement to notify the school that this happened is no longer in place, right? The province removed that requirement. Does that concern you?
It's interesting because obviously I think it's better if people notify their sort of school boards or teachers, whoever. But I think that this goes back to sort of like the enforcement. Like in the past, if somebody didn't notify the school boards, it's not like they would necessarily know. And I think that so long as parents are willing to do that voluntarily, and by I think people don't necessarily need a law nagging to do the right thing, right? Like there was essentially no enforcement of the masking bylaws in Calgary and people wore masks. There was effectively zero enforcement of cases isolating, right? We didn't know if cases were isolating or not, really, but most cases did because most people kind of do the right thing. And so, I think as we go into the fall and begin to implement some of these new things, we'll see how these policies, we're all sort of learning and adapting. And, I hope that most parents will still notify the schools if their child has COVID. And I suspect most will, actually.
How are you, Doctor Who, how are you feeling about the upcoming school year?
Well, I think I'm probably more optimistic than many, but at a very high level, I think, it's really good that schools are coming back in person based on I think that's the right thing to do given where we're at. I think that, versus I think, not doing in-person learning. I think right now the cases are such that I think doing in-person learning is better than doing virtual learning. I think that, we are going into this school year with more people vaccinated than let's say the 2020 school year started when nobody was immunized. But there's certainly a lot of kids who aren't immunized, essentially anybody under the age of 12. And so I think that if I sort of rewind the clock and go back to what I understood of school transmission in, let's say, the fall of last year, the spring of this year, I don't think there was necessarily a huge amount of within-school transmission, and I hope that continues this year. But it's all, with everything, like masking, vaccinating, going back to school in person or not, it's always like a sort of a risk-benefit analysis, and I think that we should go back in class. I think that we should take the measures that we're doing to try to keep kids safe. I think that hopefully that vaccine will be approved in under 12 pretty darn soon, and, we do all that we can. And, I only caught the last comment from, I think, one of the board chairs, but things may change. Things have always changed. And I think we'll keep an eye closely on sort of what's happening in terms of transmission, what's happening in terms of, cases, and, we'll adjust course as necessary.
Dr. Hu, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Dr. Jia Hu is a public health physician and one of the founders of 19 to 0, which is a coalition of people trying to build confidence in vaccines. Dr. Hu's also been offering advice to school boards. Maybe you received a letter for him if you have a child in the Calgary Catholic Board about he's offering advice on how to handle COVID this fall. So I hope that helped answer some of your questions. And we're spending the hour talking back to school with the chairs of Calgary and Edmonton Public School Boards. 1-866-468-4422. That's the number for you to call. 1-866-468-4422. That is the number that Jared has called. Jared's in Calgary on the phone with us now. Hello. Hello. Oh, hey, Jared. Yeah, I know we kept hold there on hold for a bit, but you're with us on the radio. Do you want to tell us a bit about you? You have one child starting school, I hear?
Yeah, so we've got a 5-year-old daughter. She's the oldest of our three, and she's starting kindergarten this year, which we're very excited about, obviously. But when it was announced that masking was going to be happening when the kids started school, I was just livid, but not because they have to wear masks, but because we're still in this place. It just feels like we've got the tools to be past where we are, but it's just yeah, we just can't get past that. So now the kids have to go back to school again with masks on, which honestly I think is the right choice. It just is so frustrating.
Yeah, probably a year ago you were thinking, oh, good heavens, I'm glad my child's not starting school this year. Right? And now here you are a year later and it's not good. And how is is it a boy or a girl, your child?
A girl.
A girl, yeah.
But the other difficult thing is I mean we've got transplant recipients in my family. We've got uncles that got organ transplants, so we're very conscious of the last thing that we want to do is be any kind of a vector of transmission. So, I mean, in response to people saying that kids don't really get sick, I completely appreciate that, you know, if my daughter caught it, chances are she'd be fine. But how awful would we feel if she went to school, got sick, brought it home, we didn't realize it, and then she ended up being that vector of transmission.
Right. Yes. All right. So, Jared, what will the school year look like for her? Is she okay with wearing a mask? Has she tried it out yet? And
oh yeah, no, she's been wearing a mask on and off as required. You know, going to playgrounds and things like that. So she doesn't have a major problem with it. And I know it's. I mean, she is not particularly excited about the fact that she's got to wear a mask at school. But I mean, she understands and appreciates why it's something that's expected.
Yeah, lots of kids say they get used to it too. Yeah. All right. Well, Jared, you brought up.
It doesn't last for too long, but again, it's just hoping those vaccine rates go up, and then which is what gets us past this. Right. In my opinion.
Jared, you brought up some good points. I'm glad you gave us a call today.
Thank you.
We'll go to Caroline now. Helga is on the phone from Caroline. Hello, Helga.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I'd like to bring something up that's not talked about a lot, and that is ventilation systems. I know one of your guests did bring it up, but I think it needs to be talked about a lot more, because if the public perceives that there is a movement towards upgrading ventilation systems to a point where masks are no longer required in schools, for example, that would give them an incentive to put up with masking for a bit longer. So that's sort of my argument.
Yeah. All right. Well, Helga, you bring up a point that often comes up on the show about ventilation, especially within schools. So I'll bring our guests. We'll say goodbye to you, Helga. I hope you keep listening in. But Marilyn Dennis, the chair of the Calgary Board of Education, is with us, as is Tricia Estabrooks, chair of Edmonton Public Schools. Let's get an update on where ventilation, we know that there have been some upgrades to ventilation in public schools in the province. Where are things at? Tricia, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, for sure. And good to hear from Jared. Just quickly, I guess I share your frustration as well. And I would say, you know, none of us want to take chances when it comes to our kids' health. Ventilation, it's another hot topic for sure. You know, here in Edmonton, at Edmonton Public, you know, we've made a few adjustments to our ventilation systems, you know, replacing filters, upgrading the filters that we're using, running or extending the runtime on some of those mechanical systems in our schools to make sure that they're running at full capacity, just to flush the air out within our schools. The reality, though, is like when it comes to like a full ventilation replacement with these HEPA filters that people are talking about, I'll be really honest. And I feel like we had the same conversation a year ago on this show, to be honest, Judy. We don't have it within our budgets to do those sorts of upgrades. And so at this point, we are adhering to all of the recommendations laid out by health officials and by sort of this, what's it called, the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and something. It's got an acronym of ASHRA. So school divisions, Edmonton Public included, we're adhering to all those recommendations. So we're doing the best we can, adhering to those recommendations. And we look to health. Like if health says, hey, we need to upgrade these ventilation systems, we'll do it, but we're going to need provincial government support in order to make that happen. And I just want to say, parents are concerned about this. We hear this. And the longer we continue to send kids to school during a pandemic, I suspect that these calls for improved ventilation systems will grow.
Marilyn Dennis, Calgary Public Schools. How confident should parents be in the state of ventilation in those schools?
Mm-hmm. So every single one of the facilities operated by CBE are mechanically ventilated. And so throughout last year, and we are continuing on with this practice, is that those ventilation systems are being run on occupy mode for at least an hour before anyone is in the building and also after everyone leaves. But then they're also set during the day on maximum air exchange so that we are, maximizing our intake of outside air coming into the school. So we are maximizing that exchange of air between outside and inside. And that practice will continue. Typically when there's a lot of mention these days of HEPA filters, and typically a HEPA filter, or in particular a portable HEPA filter unit, is often recommended when the only ventilation that a classroom might have is, say, the ability to open a window. At the CBE, we're not relying on open windows to provide ventilation. We actually do have mechanically ventilated classrooms in all of our schools, and those ventilation systems are monitored regularly and also maintained regularly. And so if there's any potential issue, that's with the operation of those systems, and those are dealt with immediately. But we will continue to have increased ventilation in our schools for this year.
Here's an interesting email that came in from Bob. He says, if you had one request for an action of the provincial government to take, what would it be? Marilyn, do you want one thing that you would want the province to do as it relates to the upcoming school year?
Yeah, so this is Marilyn Dennis's opinion, not the board of CBE, because I'll just speak for myself here. I think the one ask would be that the COVID-19 pandemic has been exceptionally disruptive to students. It has not impacted every community the same. And we have a lot of work ahead of us in terms of identifying where some learning gaps might be that may have been caused by the constant state of disruption over the last school year. We have some students who did not experience a 10-day stretch throughout the school year last year without disruption. And so it would be support to make sure that our students are well supported to be able to, so we can identify those gaps and help close those gaps in learning that may have occurred last year.
Okay, tell me more. That's interesting. What would that mean? You mean that sort of additional funding is what you would ask for to help teachers identify where there are learning gaps?
Yeah, I mean, we do have we're getting onto a different topic here, but we do have a plan in place to be able to assess where students are at. And we do that at the beginning. Educators do that at the beginning of every school year, assess where students are at. What we don't know, what isn't clear right now, is where our students are at as a result of the disruptions from last year. And so that would be, if school boards across the province find that there are gaps that need to be closed and some additional supports are required, that we would be able to get those resources in our hands. But it'll take us a little bit of time to figure out where our kids are at when they come back to us next week.
Trish Estabrooks, let me put the question to you from Bob. If you had one request for an action of the provincial government to take, what would it be?
Love the question, Bob. Where to go? I guess sort of picking up on what Marilyn was saying, and this is an issue pre-pandemic as well, is adequate funding for growing school divisions. You know, the 4 metro school divisions under the new funding framework, and we don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of that right now, but we are not adequately funded for the number of students that we educate every year. And so looking forward into the future, into a world post-pandemic and the recovery from that, we are going to need to be adequately funded. What that means is that we can hire the staff that we need to hire, that we can have the educational assistants in our classrooms to support kids. As, let's be honest, like, you know, we're going to see the other end of this pandemic, hopefully sooner rather than later, but we're going to need to support students and their families going forward, as we have as educators and as school division and as trustees and as board chairs. But I just feel like some of the needs in our schools are going to become more acute. And I think we're going to start to see some of that stuff emerge, in particular this year, welcoming back so many kids after what's been, you know, Jared says it, this is challenging. It is tough. It is tough to be a parent right now. And I really feel for parents who are, you know, looking ahead to the school year, and a mix of optimism and excitement, but also some cautiousness again. And it's tough to navigate.
Donna's on the phone now. Donna is in Edmonton. Donna, hi. You're with us here on Alberta at Noon.
Yeah, my question has to do with the test taking, you know, for COVID. With all of the closures that we've had provincially of both the vaccination rooms and the testing capacity, and the fact that now people have to pay for their testing, how is that going to affect you? And is there any funding available for parents that are going to be in that boat?
I should just note, Don, I think originally Dr. Hinshaw announced that testing for symptomatic Albertans, now it'll be kept in place until the end of September. It was supposed to expire mid-August, but those measures were extended for another 6 weeks. But your concern is sort of ongoing around access to testing, COVID testing for parents?
Exactly, yeah. Because, I mean, if let's say a classroom, there's somebody in the classroom that has it, and all those parents are going to want to test their kids to see if their kid has it.
Well, they won't be notified anymore, right? If there is a positive test, you don't have to notify.
That's another issue. Yeah, it's another issue. But it's just that the funding, I mean, has been stripped. And I think it should be
testing is still available. You can go to your
for 6 weeks, eh?
Well, and I think you can go to it's just the big testing centers, but you can go to your doctor and be tested if you're symptomatic for COVID.
I know, but you got to pay for it though.
Well, that might be outside the realm of what Marilyn and Tricia can answer. But Tricia, do you want to address that at all? Yeah, some thoughts on concerns about access to COVID testing for parents.
Yeah. And you know, you're right. It's sort of in place till September 27th, but we don't know what's going to happen after that. That's under the direction of Dr. Hinshaw and our health minister. I guess this sort of wait and see approach. Let's wait and see what happens in our schools. Let's wait and see if cases spike. No, I prefer a more proactive approach, quite frankly. You know, if parents... Certainly, parents are going to want to have their children tested. You know, one of the don't send your kids to school if they're feeling sick or they're showing symptoms. Well, the follow-up to that would be you take your child to get a COVID test. So accessibility, making it easy for families to take their children to get a COVID test, to me, is a key part of this back to school plan. And so, you know, I know CBE and Edmonton Public, all school divisions will be watching September 27th quite closely to see what decision will be made around some of the restrictions or what will be offered. So, you know, my board, we've been quite vocal about this. We are advocating to continue to contact trace, continuing for self-isolation, mandatory masking, obviously, screening, you know, all the measures that we know worked last year. We're continuing to advocate for those to continue on for this school year as well.
Polly's on the phone now. Polly is in Calgary. Hi, Polly.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, you've just retired, I understand, from being a teacher.
Yeah, this is my first fall not going back to the classroom in years. And I'm so glad that the school board has mandated masks and the other safety protocols in place, because I also felt nervous last year, and I would even more so this year with the variant, because I'm also a primary caregiver for my elderly parents in a long-term care facility. Mm. And just the idea of maybe someone having it in the class or no one knowing or sharing that information, and then I would go into a long-term care facility. I just think the masks worked last year, they'll work this year, and we need that layer of protection.
Well, Polly, enjoy your first year of retirement, and thank you for giving us a call.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Marilyn Dennis, Tricia Estabrooks, we are coming to the end of the program. Can I give you each just like 45 seconds or so, just to the message that you would pass on to parents as, the school year approaches? Marilyn.
Thank you. Happy to do that. I just, to all of our parents and students out there and all of our educators, certainly with all of my heart, I wish you nothing but a spectacular school year. I do hope that you are more excited than nervous heading back to school, and that if you're nervous, it's more about, who's my teacher going to be, or is my friend going to be in my class, as opposed to whether or not you're going to feel safe in school, because we're doing everything that we can to make sure that you do feel safe in school and stay well. We are doing everything we can to make sure that the disruptions to your learning are absolutely minimized. We are really, really looking forward to having students back in our classrooms with the teachers in front of them, so that all of you can be back in class with your friends and teachers. So,
all right, Marilyn, I'm going to jump in. The clock is ticking away on you. Tricia Estabrooks, your final thought for parents as they head back to school.
Schools are the hearts of our communities. Kids need to be back in person schooling. The restrictions we have in place are going to help make that happen. I'd also say that safety in schools, again, is a shared responsibility. So I think there's excitement, like I said, but I also think there's cautiousness. Edmonton Public, we have a solid plan in place, and clarity is kindness. Finally, good open communication with your school community, I think, is essential going forward. We can do this. We can get through it.
Well, I always love having you on the program and appreciate your time. I know all the parents and other teachers out there do as well. So thank you to both of you. Marilyn Dennis, Chair of the Calgary Board of Education. Tricia Estabrooks, Chair of Edmonton Public Schools. School's back on later this week. And both Marilyn and Tricia are among the candidates running for re-election this fall. That's all the time we have on the program for today. If you're interested in sort of an explanation on why masks are being mandated in those school boards, you can listen back to the podcast of the show at about 12:30. Dr. Jiahu sort of explains that, because we're hearing lots of people concerned about masks. We'll podcast the show later today, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.